G'day chaps, welcome to my video about the 10 things I think you should know before you start playing Cities Skylines. Now then, firstly, this video is aimed primarily at new players, but there'll be a couple of tips in here that I picked up from other videos, so you may not know them when you're playing. Maybe worth watching anyway, or if you're just interested on what someone else thinks. Secondly, if you don't own the game, I would highly recommend picking it up. As with many other people, I was a great fan of the SimCity series, but completely avoided the last one because it was a clusterfuck. This, however, is absolutely brilliant. The mechanics work fantastically. They have full support for modding. The Steam Workshop contains loads of stuff, new maps, new buildings, tweaks that people want, and so once you've played the game and you sort of got the hang of it, you can add all kinds of mods, and you can even fly around in a helicopter if you want to look at the beautiful city you've made. Okay, without further ado, let's get let's get into my tips. Firstly, very simply, before you start building, you have to kind of think ahead. So you're going to have a motorway in the middle. I would personally always tend to build away from the motorway entrance, leaving plenty of space in the middle. So when you start to build your city, don't build it right next to the motorway. You have to think ahead. You're going to be expanding constantly. So I tend to build a road, as much of a road as I can, bearing in mind you don't have much money in the beginning, but try to build sort of down the center of your map and get away from the motorway to begin with. Okay. Secondly, this is kind of obvious, but you're going to want to build an industrial area first. So this kind of goes back to the first point. You're thinking ahead. It's a good idea to have a rough idea of where you want to put your central business district, your highest value buildings in the end. I've tended to go for the area sort of near the beach, near the water, because in real life this would be the area that is the most beautiful, the highest value, and I think would become the central business district, or CBD as we call it in Australia. And with that in mind, when I started building my industrial area, I tried to, it's kind of ironic in the beginning of the game, but I actually tried to pick the worst spot, because your industrial area is going to be ugly, dirty, it's going to create loads of pollution, and in the end it's going to be quite a low value area. Yeah, so just sort of bear that general structure in mind before you start building. Point 3, this is something I picked up from another video. I'd use one-way roads at 45-degree angles, and the reason for this is very simple, because there are no traffic lights. Roundabouts are another good idea for this. So roundabouts are very good, but using roads at 45-degree angles means that there are no traffic lights, and this can hugely speed up it can improve the flow of traffic throughout your city, especially coming in and out of your city. And that's the crucial thing, because if you have any build-ups, especially coming in or going out of your city, you can have some real problems. Just a kind of supplementary point to this is that when you're building your industrial area, you're going to need links in and out of this industrial area, and then when you start building your next area, be it commercial or the central business district or whatever, you're going to kind of want to have independent links to the motorway from that new area. Because with the industrial area, you're always going to have trucks coming in and out delivering goods, and that's quite a high volume of traffic. So you're going to want to try and separate that traffic from the sort of higher value traffic that's coming in and out for your commercial stuff. Okay. Point 4. Your workers actually need to live very close to industry, and the same with commercial, or your industrial buildings will shut down. Now, I didn't realize this in the beginning, and I built a whole industrial area, and I thought, it's very well planned. It's kind of more like real life because you have a separate section for industry, and it was well connected with buses and trains and even metro lines, and the buildings failed, and that simply was because they didn't have enough workers. And that, I found after further experimentation, was because the workers didn't live close enough to the industrial buildings. So what I ended up doing with my later city builds was building almost like rows of industry and commercial. So you'd have one row of industry, one row of commercial in the middle, and that was because from industry you have pollution, so you don't want to put residential and industrial right next to each other, because the residential buildings, the inhabitants get sick. So what I did was I had like a row of industry, or a cluster of industry if you want a different shape, and then you do a sort of a layer of commercial around it, and commercial isn't affected by pollution, so that's fine. And then I'd build residential right next to it, and that completely solved the problems with workers getting to industry. There we go. Point 5. Leave gaps next to intersections when you zone. And also build public services 1 square away from main roads, because you will upgrade your roads in time, or you will at least want to. So the point here is that you kind of thinking ahead. So imagine you're building a grid of houses. You could just fill the entire grid with residential, let them all build houses, and then when you come to build fire stations, police stations, metro stations, whatever, later, you knock those houses down. Okay, you could do that. Another way to do it is to build grids, build your grid structure or whatever shape you want to do, and then at the intersections of those roads, you actually leave a space in the beginning. And you do that because you're thinking ahead, and you know that you will be putting public services in those spaces, so you want to leave them blank. Another temporary thing you can do is put parks there or build trees to kind of beautify the area and make your residents happier and actually raise the land value, which brings in better quality houses. Yeah, and then the other thing is you'll want to expand your roads later. So as traffic increases, you don't want single lane roads anymore. You're going to need, like in the body, you're going to need arteries to carry the traffic out of there. And it can be expensive, especially if you've placed public services, to destroy them and then rebuild them or even move them. So yeah, while you might not want to build big roads in the beginning simply because of the cost, you have to kind of think ahead. So yeah, again, this is another reason to leave a gap at intersections until later, and then you can upgrade your roads when you have more cash. Okay, point 6. I always do, and I think it's a good idea, to take the cheapest loan available early on. Also, you want to increase your taxes on residential and commercial to 12% when demand is high, but no more. So 12% seems to be the optimal level. If demand is an issue, you want to drop the tax, obviously, but if you start increasing your tax to more than 13%, some will start leaving. After I've sort of started my city, because in the beginning, industry is in demand because your workers are uneducated, so industry moves in to kind of take advantage of them. However, later in the game, your industrial production the demand tends to drop. So I tend to drop tax on industry later once commercial has picked up the slack and jobs are coming in. But I've tended not to want to lose industry completely, because you don't want your residents to be unemployed because your population will start dropping. This is all especially important in the first half of the game. Later on, you'll be able to tweak and you'll be quite used to it. But yeah, going back and just reiterating again, take the cheapest loan early on in the game. The rate of interest is actually quite low on that, so you're not going to struggle to pay it back, and it's going to help you build at a better pace than you would otherwise. Okay, let's move on now. Number 7, in the beginning, you want to reduce your electricity and water budgets to 50% to begin with. Now, this is intended to be done right at the beginning when you're first building your industrial area. So you're going to build your water plants, your industrial, your electricity generating plant, whatever it is, but you're going to have spare capacity. So in that beginning stage, every dollar counts. So if you drop your budgets to 50%, that's much better. Also, as you're starting to grow, a little bit later, rather than building a second plant right away, it's better to increase your budget on electricity. So that gets a bit more juice out of your plant, and it saves you the big sort of sunk cost or capital investment of building another one. Okay, let's move on to point 8. So this is another thing about thinking ahead. A big thing is railways. Now, this is kind of hard to do without a little practice, and it's also quite hard to get right, because I've tried this a couple of ways, and anyway, I'll mention it and you either take it or leave it. But you want to think ahead to railways. So after I'd sort of built my first cities and got used to the game and really got the hang of it, when I came to build my later ones, I started leaving a gap right in the middle of the city. And while it's really tempting to fill that in, I tended to sort of leave a space in the middle and then build almost in a U shape around it. That sort of U shape as well, I had one-way traffic, so going in from the motorway, around the side, and then coming back out again. And that means that you can get your traffic to every little part of your city, more or less, without having to zigzag or cross or whatever. So it's nice and simple. Also, because you've got that space in the middle, it leaves you a chunk of space to put your train stations later. A bonus on top of this is that you can also put your landfills and your cemeteries there as temporary structures. And then later, when you have more money, you can build ones that don't produce pollution and the residents don't mind. But in the beginning, that sort of space in the middle can be really useful just as a temporary space. So you want to think ahead. Another thing just on railways is that once you build docks or ports for ships, a really good idea is to build a freight railway station right next to the port, because if you don't do that, you have tons and tons and tons and tons of trucks that turn up and basically clog up all your roads around the port. A sort of secondary point here is that, how can I explain it? So you have your main train track through your map, okay? Simple enough. And then when you build your first freight station, you're going to build that off of the main track. Now that first freight station, you actually want to have that linking to the main line across your map, but that's it. You don't want to... Okay, let me put it this way. If you build that station that links off the map, and then you build another unconnected freight station right next to it, what will happen is the train will come in from outside the map, it will dock at that freight station. And then the other freight station that you've built that's not connected to the line going out of the map will pick up all of the freight that needs to be shipped around your city without the trucks clogging it up. So if you build two freight stations next to each other, one of those stations which is linked to the line going off the map, and the other one which isn't, which is only linked to an internal line, what happens is when the train comes in, it pulls up, all the trucks turn up, All they do is they drive from one freight station to the other, instead of driving all the way around your city and clogging up your traffic. So that's a very, very minor tip, but it can be kind of useful, and I hope that made sense. Okay. Point 9, ore and oil. Use ore and oil where you can find it. It makes a lot more money than normal, but it's also worth monitoring how much is left under your factories, because it's actually sucked out pretty quick. It comes out of the ground pretty quick. So, you know, you can have an oil area, you completely cover it with factories. They boom, they absolutely boom to begin with. But then you'll find, you know, within an hour maybe, that the oil is gone, and then they're not functioning anymore, and then you need to cancel the zoning you have there and turn them back into regular factories. And when you turn them back, the demand may not be the same as it was previously. So when you're building, when you're mining, or if you're extracting oil from the ground, you have to bear in mind while you're building them that it's not going to last forever. So one way to manage this is, if you have a big area of oil, maybe take a slice of it first and build factories on that, and then let them suck it dry, and then take the next slice of it, and then the next slice, and so on. Another cool thing is actually using sustainable forestry for your industrial areas is extremely good. So you can zone, I don't know if you've done this before if you're new to the game, but you can actually create zones, and this is for the same for ore and oil. You can create a zone for forestry, and for logging. So your factories produce or grow trees, and then they cut the trees, and that's their industry. Now, the good thing about this is that they create zero pollution, none whatsoever. So they create noise pollution, but they create no actual air pollution. So residents don't mind living next to them at all, apart from the sounds. And the other good thing is that those forestry industries are completely sustainable, so they can last forever. You don't need to worry about the resource being used up. So I tend to build forestry industry wherever I can. Very, very cool. Okay, finally, I kind of mentioned this before, but I'll reiterate because it's really important. Just bear in mind all the time that you can have a central business district, and personally, I like to have a heart to my city. So, you know, taking Melbourne, where I live, as an example, Melbourne was actually a planned city, and the central business district here is laid out in a grid structure, kind of like New York, and it's fantastic. That area is exclusively commercial. It's extremely high value, very tall buildings, and it's also connected with trams, train. It's surrounded by parks, and I think this is something that is good to kind of emulate in your game. So when I built my central business district, I put a big park in the middle, like Central Park in New York. Try to build around it. You put all your special buildings in there too, to raise the value. You always want to raise the value, because that creates a kind of hub for your city, and then your population will continue to keep on flooding in. So you can just build and build and build, and really sort of get to the point where you've pretty much completed the game and there's no more to do. You've got a successful city if you can do that. So there we go. Okay, there's my 10 points. I hope you've enjoyed my tips. I really hope you've taken something away from this. As always, I greatly appreciate your feedback and any ideas, especially about future videos you'd like to see. Finally, a thumbs up is really good, if you wouldn't mind, because it helps my ranking in YouTube. So it helps me get more views, and if you sub, then you'll obviously see all my new content. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.